England has long been famous for its educational establishments. Burgess Hill School is against the carbon copy boarding school product. The right sort of education will channel a child's vitality into creative activities. This sort of painting may be a bit strange, but at least she's having fun.
After 1960 brought South Korea's April Revolution massacre, South Africa's Sharpeville massacre, and the most violent race riot in the history of Mississippi, everyone was hoping 1961 would be a little more chill. It wouldn't. Instead, it brought more riots, more war, and the Soviet Union detonating a 58-megaton yield hydrogen bomb, resulting in the largest man-made explosion in history. At the same time, Breakfast at Tiffany's hit theaters, Adolf Eichmann faced justice for his war crimes, and did somebody say home run chase? So we're going to take you through the news, culture, sports, entertainment, and all that was weird in 1961. Because this is Timeline. Get ready to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Because this one is all about 1961. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. And let us know what aspects of the 60s you're most interested to hear about in the comments below. Now, are you ready to learn what happened the year Paul McCartney started playing bass?
That's for sure.
After Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba, the U.S. became concerned he would align himself with the communist bloc.
There is a limit to what the United States in self-respect can endure. That limit has now been reached.
Those suspicions were confirmed when Castro signed a trade agreement with the Soviet Union in early 1960. So, on January 3rd, the U.S. kicked off 1961 by ending diplomatic relations with Cuba. Those relations wouldn't be restored until July of 2015, nearly 50 years later.
Hello, I'm Mr. Ed.
Hello, Sherry. How are you?
What's with the beret and the phonograph? Where'd you get them?
I order them over the telephone. I am thinking of taking the trip around the world.
The only trip you're taking is around the stable.
I'm afraid the girl will have to go. Quickly.
All right. Today.
Who do you work for?
I don't know. Nobody knows.
Tell us about Keel.
Doctor. Unmarried. Pimlico. We'll go to heaven. Yes, we'll go to heaven.
On January 11th, segregationists protesting the desegregation of the University of Georgia in Athens rioted over the admission of two African-American students, Hamilton E. Holmes and Charlene Hunter. The riot resulted in several arrests, but also the suspension of Holmes and Hunter, which had to be overturned by a court. The two, however, did eventually graduate and found work in their respective fields. In 1960, the Primettes singer Diana Ross asked her friend Smokey Robinson to get her group an audition with Motown Records boss Berry Gordy. Gordy was impressed, but advised the ladies to come back after they finished high school. Undeterred, the group started hanging out at Gordy's studio, and on January 15th, he agreed to sign them, but only if they changed their name. They didn't like any of the names he suggested, but came up with their own, the Supremes. The Broadway musical Dreamgirls, which opened December 20th, 1981, followed the career of the Dreams, a group much like the Supremes, with a lead singer much like Diana Ross. Despite its success, Ross herself had deeply mixed emotions, concerned that people would think the production, which appropriated her image and likeness, but also took dramatic license with events, was an actual portrayal of her life story. After defeating Richard Nixon in the presidential election of 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was inaugurated as the 35th President of the United States on January 20th. Kennedy's inaugural address was devoid of partisan rhetoric and mostly focused on foreign policy. But the part everyone would remember was when he challenged Americans to
ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Walt Disney's wonderful feature-length cartoon, 101 Dalmatians. London's Dalmatian population is missing. Meet the exotic beauty who runs the racket.
My only true love, darling. I live for furs.
Yes, come along to mirthful mystery and comic villainy. Recommended for everyone.
On February 1st, U.S. defense capabilities took a big leap forward when the military test-fired its first Minuteman I intercontinental ballistic missile at Cape Canaveral in Florida.
This represents firepower for the modern Air Force. Named Minuteman for its predecessor, it too is loaded, poised, and ready.
According to the New York Times, the Minuteman was intended to be the Air Force's #1 weapon, with an eventual range of 6,300 miles. By all accounts, the test was a massive success. Feeling depressed, actress Marilyn Monroe spoke with psychiatrist Marianne Criss, who advised her to check into the Cornell University Medical Center to rest. After following that advice on February 5th, however, Monroe was instead taken to the psychiatric ward and locked up with the psychotic patients. After 3 days of protest, she was allowed to call her ex-husband, baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, who threatened to tear the place apart with his bare hands if she wasn't released. It worked.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by
7-function, remote-control color television, so beautiful it enhances any decor. Superb cabinetry, master-crafted of the finest woods. The one big feature that sets it apart is an amazing new wireless wizard electronic remote control. A color set that puts RCA Victor years ahead in dependable performance.
On February 21st, NASA's Space Task Group met to decide which of the Mercury 7 astronauts would begin training for the U.S.'s first crewed spaceflight. Flying skills were obviously important, but NASA was also looking at the candidates' technical knowledge, their physical and mental resilience, and their ability to adapt to unexpected conditions.
We are now weightless. Good Lord, what an interesting feeling this is.
Based on those criteria, they eventually settled on 3 men: John Glenn, Virgil Gus Grissom, and Alan Shepard. After his third presidential debate with Nixon in 1960, Kennedy headed to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he found 10,000 students still waiting to hear him speak at 2 a.m. Kennedy asked them if they would be willing to serve their country by spending years abroad helping a developing nation.
So I come here tonight to go to bed, but I also come here tonight to ask you to join in the effort.
Apparently, he liked the response, because on March 1st, he issued Executive Order No. 10924, establishing the Peace Corps.
This corps will be a pool of trained men and women sent overseas by the United States government or through private institutions and organizations to help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower. I'm hopeful that it will be a source of satisfaction to Americans and a contribution to world peace.
So now Mattel brings you Ken, Barbie's boyfriend.
Mattel's Barbie doll hit shelves on March 9, 1959, and sales exceeded expectations. So just over 2 years later, on March 11th, they introduced Barbie's male counterpart, Ken.
Ken and Barbie meet for lunch at school, go to fraternity parties, and just relax together.
Named for the son of Barbie's creator, the original Ken had arms that wouldn't bend and hair made from felt. Nonetheless, the toy caught on, and since then he's had over 40 professions, including astronaut, snowboarder, and dentist. It's weird to think that there was a time when people who lived in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, didn't have the right to vote for president. But there was. That time, however, ended on March 29th with the ratification of the 23rd Amendment. Despite not being a state, the amendment granted the District of Columbia the right to vote in the election, with the limitation that it can never have more electors than the least populous state. After endorsing violent action in the struggle against apartheid, South African activist Nelson Mandela was arrested in December of 1956 and, along with over 90 others, charged with high treason.
From the very beginning, the African National Congress has fought without hesitation against all forms of racial discrimination, and we shall continue to do so until freedom is achieved.
The treason trial, as it came to be known, would officially begin in August of 1958, and though 60 people would be dropped from the indictment in January of 1959, Mandela would be one of the defendants who had to see it through, until he was acquitted on March 29, 1961.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks.
This girl is a young girl that I saw down at a nightclub called the Bonsoir when she was there a couple of months ago. She's never been, to the best of my knowledge, on network television before.
On April 5th, funny girl Barbara Streisand made her television debut on The Jack Paar Show.
Are all your friends in Detroit watching you tonight?
I think so. And I got such beautiful flowers for my friends.
Thank them for the flowers.
Thank you. Where do I thank them?
I don't know.
Over there.
Paar was on vacation that night, so the woman who would be Yentl was introduced by guest host Orson Bean before performing the song A Sleepin' Bee. 6:07 a.m. on April 12th, the Soviet Union took the lead in the space race when it launched the Vostok 1 spacecraft from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The only one on board was pilot Yuri Gagarin, who would rocket into history as the first human being to ever go into space. At launch, Mission Control told the cosmonaut, "We wish you a good flight. Everything's all right." To which he responded, "Off we go. Goodbye. Until we meet soon, dear friends." On April 17th, Cuban exiles opposed to Fidel Castro attempted an invasion of their homeland. While the CIA staged a diversionary attack elsewhere, the real invasion force landed at several sites, including the Bay of Pigs. Despite being financed by the U.S., however, the invaders proved no match for Cuba's military. By April 19th, the exiles' last stronghold was taken, along with over 1,100 prisoners. The Bay of Pigs invasion, which succeeded only at making Castro a bigger hero to his people, would go down as one of the U.S.'s greatest foreign policy failures.
Have you got your silencer? Yes. Good. Then use it. Shoot the laundry boy. Captain, this man's insane! Surely you won't let him do this!
Can't stop him. He's in charge. Anyway, I agree with him. Of course, he doesn't have to shoot you. I mean, all he has to do is to call our HQ and you'll be on the first troop ship home.
Carl Foreman's The Guns of Navarone, the greatest high adventure of our time.
In the summer of 1960, Robert Carrier saw his young son and his friend wetting the painted concrete in a driveway and then sliding around on it. Carrier was immediately concerned for their safety, but also strangely inspired. So the next day, he brought home a 50-foot roll of Naugahyde, laid it in the driveway, and after a little tinkering, he invented the now iconic children's toy, the Slip and Slide, which he patented on May 2nd, 1961. A group of civil rights activists left Washington, D.C. on a bus on May 4th for the first Freedom Ride, looking to challenge southern states that were slow to enforce the Supreme Court's ruling that segregated buses were unconstitutional. The Freedom Riders, themselves a mixed racial group, headed to Louisiana.
We would be very happy to have you embark upon this dangerous, worthwhile, significant mission.
Along the way, the group, which included future Congressman John Lewis, provoked law enforcement and drew violent reactions. They never reached New Orleans, but they did inspire hundreds of others to follow in their footsteps, ultimately winning the desegregation of the buses. The Soviets may have been the first to put a man in space, but the U.S. wasn't far behind. And on May 5th, as 45 million watched on television, Alan Shepard became the second man and first American to head to the stars. Shepard blasted off in the Mercury capsule he named Freedom 7 before making a 15-minute suborbital flight designed to prove his body could tolerate the G-force of liftoff and re-entry.
Freedom 7 is still go. The trajectory is A-OK. 5.5 pounds per square inch. Oxygen go. All systems go.
The capsule then landed by parachute in the North Atlantic Ocean. The unmitigated success of Alan Shepard's flight in the Freedom 7 was so inspiring to President Kennedy that just 3 weeks later, he would go before a joint session of Congress and promise the world that the U.S. would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. But in a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. We make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation.
After reading about 2 students imprisoned by the Portuguese military dictatorship for toasting to freedom at a restaurant, British lawyer Peter Benenson conceived the Appeal for Amnesty campaign. He then launched it by writing an editorial highlighting the struggles of 8 such forgotten prisoners. The response was so overwhelming that on May 28th, it led to the creation of Amnesty International, a network designed to aid people detained for their beliefs.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by...
He's excited because he just saw the new Ford Falcon.
This year, the Falcon gives you more power, more luxury, more of everything that has made it the world's most successful new car.
I must say, I'm very impressed.
Radio stations began broadcasting on FM as early as the 1930s, but it would take until 1961 until they could broadcast in FM stereo. That radio station was WGFM of Schenectady, New York, and because it was owned by General Electric, it had the hardware ready to go on the first day such broadcasts were authorized by the FCC, June 1st. On June 3rd, Clarence Earl Gideon was arrested in Florida and charged with breaking and entering. At his arraignment, Gideon insisted that the U.S. Supreme Court said the state must appoint him a lawyer, since he couldn't afford one.
Let the record show that the defendant has asked the court to appoint counsel to represent him in this trial.
I thought that was a constitutional right, and I didn't know no different.
But he was wrong, and he was found guilty. He then appealed on the same grounds.
On the grounds that I was made to stand trial without the aid of counsel.
And the Supreme Court decided Gideon was right, unanimously ruling that the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution requires states to provide attorneys for indigent defendants. And speaking of the Supreme Court, just 2 weeks later they would decide the landmark case of Mapp v. Ohio, holding that the exclusionary rule, which prevents federal prosecutors from using evidence obtained in violation of a defendant's Fourth Amendment protections against illegal search and seizures, also applied to prosecutions by the state.
Night Tide, with its boundless power, ties these two together in a love tainted by strange, sinister terror.
Guess we're all a little afraid of what we love.
Literary titan Ernest Hemingway committed suicide at his home in Ketchum, Idaho, on July 2nd.
He was sick, but he did talk about suicide. You know, his father killed himself with a gun in the same way.
Hemingway, author of books like The Sun Also Rises and The Old Man and the Sea, was a lifelong alcoholic and had recently been treated with electroconvulsive therapy in connection with depression and paranoia. 2 days after being discharged, however, he retrieved his favorite shotgun from the basement of his home, loaded it, put the end in his mouth, and pulled the trigger.
The Hemingway we are talking about did not choose his death.
Yes.
He might have, but he wasn't that man.
On July 4th, the Soviet nuclear submarine K-19 was conducting exercises off the coast of Greenland when its reactor cooling system sprung a leak, causing its pumps to fail. The reactor temperature began to rise, but the ship's radio was damaged, so it could not call for help. With no other options, the captain ordered the engineers to rig up a new cooling system, exposing themselves to deadly radiation in the process. 8 men would die as a result, but they prevented a meltdown. Just over 41 years later, the story of the K-19 would be loosely adapted into the film K-19, The Widowmaker. Loosely based on the events of 1961, the film starred Harrison Ford as the captain.
You needlessly endangered this boat and its crew.
I took this boat and these men to the edge because we need to know where it is.
And despite ratcheting up the drama, it was a box office bomb. As for the title, the nickname Widowmaker was made up for the film. In real life, the nuclear disaster earned K-19 the nickname Hiroshima.
6 Flags over Texas, 6 Flags over Texas.
The first Six Flags was called Six Flags Over Texas, and it opened in Arlington on August 1st. Conceived by real estate developer and oilman Angus Wynn Jr., the park was a temporary way to squeeze a few extra dollars out of a piece of land he planned to turn into an industrial site. But after it made nearly $4 million in his first 18 months, he made it permanent. Today, Six Flags is the world's largest regional theme park company. Despite having a cover date of November 1st, the first issue of the comic book series Fantastic Four actually hit newsstands on August 8th. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the issue featured the first appearance of the team, explained how they got their powers, and then saw them join forces to battle the evil Mole Man, who would become one of their regular foes. On August 13th, the East German government started construction on the Berlin Wall, a concrete barrier, complete with prison-like guard towers, that separated West Berlin from East Berlin, as well as the rest of East Germany. Soviet propaganda claimed the wall was intended to protect the citizens of East Germany from fascist elements, but its actual function was to prevent those citizens from escaping to the West. To appease citizens demanding political reforms, the East German government made some minor changes to travel regulations. Those changes were announced on the evening of November 9th by Politburo spokesman Günter Schabowski. But Schabowski misstated them in a way that made it sound like East Germans were free to travel to the West immediately.
As I understand it, it goes into effect immediately, without delay.
Crowds gathered at the Berlin Wall demanding the gates be opened, and the overwhelmed guards eventually yielded to their demands. The evening would become known as the night the Berlin Wall fell.
Only in the professionally suspicious mental process of the district attorney's office is there need for a more sinister explanation.
Come on, Dad, seriously. Don't you wish you could know whether a client is really innocent?
Many times, I'd rather not know. If I did, I wouldn't be able to do my job.
Fran Tarkenton was a third-round pick in the NFL's 1961 draft, and he went to the Minnesota Vikings, a brand-new franchise that would play their first game against the Chicago Bears on September 17th. Quarterback George Shaw started that game, but when he proved ineffective, Tarkenton came off the bench and made history, becoming the first quarterback ever to throw 4 touchdown passes in their first game.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by...
Well, that's enough for today. Now for a lively lift. Ice-cold Coca-Cola. There's no waistline worry with Coke, you know. Actually, this individual-sized bottle has no more calories than half a grapefruit. Another thing, the cold, crisp taste of Coke is so satisfying, it keeps me from eating something else that might really add those pounds. Oh, and remember, Coke is low in calories, too. Say, now, don't you get any thinner.
On September 19th, married couple Betty and Barney Hill were in their car when they saw a bright light in the sky. The object's strange movements convinced them to stop for a closer look. And, using binoculars, they observed a flying saucer piloted by humanoid creatures. In the subsequent days, they would come to believe they were abducted and experimented on by aliens. Their story drew massive media coverage, marking what is now regarded as the first highly publicized alien abduction claim. And speaking of outer space, on September 19th, NASA official James E. Webb informed the media that the agency would be constructing a new manned spacecraft center in Texas, just southeast of Houston. The $60 million facility would become the nerve center of NASA spaceflight operations and would forever be known by the nickname Houston, as in...
Houston, we've had a problem. You don't leave much when you miss, do you, Fat Man? That's what the game's all about. You know, I got a hunch, Fat Man. I got a hunch it's me from here on in. 1 ball, corner pocket. I mean, that ever happened to you? All of a sudden you feel like you can't miss? 'Cause I dreamed about this game, Fat Man. I dreamed about this game every night on the road. 5 ball.
For baseball fans, 1961 was all about the home run chase between Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris. The two were both paced to break Babe Ruth's long-standing record of 60 homers in a season. The only question was, who would do it first? Turns out, it would be Maris, who hit the record-breaking number 61 off Red Sox pitcher Tracy Stoller in the 4th inning of a game at Yankee Stadium on October 1st.
Breathe. Tonight's episode, Lady Killer, starring Leslie Nielsen, co-starring Martin Balsam, Robert Redford, with special guest star Anne Francis.
You better keep an eye on him.
Then he's not really sick.
Well, there are symptoms.
What symptoms?
Well...
Come on, I'm the boy's father.
He turned down his cupcake.
He turned down his cupcake? And you didn't call an ambulance?
Imagine how terrified you'd be if the president appeared on television to tell you it might be a good idea to build a nuclear fallout shelter at your home. Well, on October 6th, in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy did just that, advising Americans to build shelters to protect themselves against radiation in the event of a nuclear war with the Soviet Union, emphatically adding, the time to start is now.
I'm going home now and take a nice, long bubble bath. I got a date with Nardo after the Rumble. What Rumble? Nardo Sharks and those boys at the dance. They fight each other tonight? They don't play Patsy.
Widely considered one of the most important novels of the 20th century, Joseph Heller's Catch-22 was released November 11th. The novel, which follows a U.S. Army bombardier during World War II, examines the absurdities of war and life in the military. It is, however, most famous for its titular paradox, which refers to a problem for which the only solution is denied by a circumstance inherent in the problem or by a rule. Michael Rockefeller was the great-grandson of Standard Oil co-founder John D. Rockefeller, and he was an explorer. On November 17th, while canoeing between villages in New Guinea, his boat capsized. Rockefeller and his companion clung to the sinking boat as long as they could, but Rockefeller eventually decided to swim for shore. Despite rumors he was killed by natives, his fate remains unknown. Beyond that, he was last seen alive on November 19th. Thalidomide was released in 1957 and marketed as a cure for morning sickness in pregnant women. As it turned out, however, it could cause serious birth defects. Between 10 and 20,000 newborns were believed to have been affected, 40% of which died at or just after birth. Once thalidomide was identified as the cause, West Germany became the first nation to withdraw it from the market on November 23rd. Despite receiving an F for the composition in his high school music class, songwriter Brian Wilson opted to record Surfin' and release it as the Beach Boys' first single on November 27th. The song, which tapped into California's surfing culture, would be a huge success, launching the career of one of the most famous bands of all time and prefiguring their later hits like Surfin' Safari and Surfin' USA. 58 years after getting an F in class for the song that would start him on the way to becoming a rock and roll legend, Beach Boys' Brian Wilson returned to his alma mater at Hawthorne High School in Los Angeles. And while he was there, the school's then principal, Dr. Vanessa Landesfein, reversed his old music teacher's evaluation, officially giving Wilson an A on his history-changing composition.
You got me an A?
Yeah, I gave you an A.
What was the grade before?
Here's an F.
If you're wondering whether Elvis's popularity fully recovered after his stint in the Army, well, the soundtrack for his 1961 film Blue Hawaii, which includes his timeless rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love, was released on October 20th. It hit #1 on December 11th, and there it would stay for 20 consecutive weeks, finishing the decade as the second best-selling soundtrack, behind only West Side Story.
I'm gonna have a headache.
Finally, on December 11th, the carrier USNS Core arrived in Saigon with 400 U.S. Army personnel and the first U.S. helicopter unit to be sent. Those helicopters were charged with airlifting South Vietnamese troops into combat, marking the beginning of the U.S.'s direct involvement in the Vietnam War. And that's how 1961 ended, with the Beach Boys on their way to stardom, NASA on its way to Houston, and the U.S. on its way to a quagmire. And the only thing that seemed sure about the 60s was that absolutely anything might happen. See you soon for 1962. So what do you think? And which of these items did you find most interesting? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other timeline videos.